yourself why you're the best.
How long do I have?
Well, just don't take it out.
I wish I speak fun.
Right, what do you want?
Just the brown over there.
This guy here will bullshit you. Keep going.
Over to the brown.
Where do you want
All the way to the
All the way
middle.
there.
It's brown.
Yeah,
There you go. How's that?
that's good.
Where did you get Karen? Oh, she's outside. Okay. All right. Okay. All righty? Go for it. Okay, just first of all, to set your mind at ease, I pledge that if elected, I will join the lawsuit to declare the health care bill unconstitutional. And I will be talking about the 10th Amendment, because as superintendent of schools, I've been fighting on 10th Amendment issues as well. 10th Amendment is the amendment says that those powers not expressly given the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people respectively. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the federal government can force you to buy health care if you don't want to. I think you're all familiar with my role as superintendent of schools. I've been working hard to raise academic standards, test for those standards, hold accountable our schools, our teachers, and our students, making conservative principles work in the superintendent's office. And we've shown results. On the Terranova test, which is a national test that all our students, grades 2 through 9 take, were above the national average. Scholastic aptitude test above the national average. ACT college entrance test above the national average. We've raised in the last 4 years, we've raised our graduation rate from 68% to 76%, again above the national average. So we've shown, I think we've brought a new sense of urgency to the schools, that the kids have to learn more to compete in the 21st century, brought academic rigor to the classroom, and we've shown results. And I refer to this as making conservative principles work in the superintendent's office. Now, it's time to make conservative principles work in the Attorney General's office, which we haven't been able to do for the last 16 years. And not as well known compared to my role as superintendent is my legal background. I was a practicing lawyer for 30 years. I learned education simultaneously serving on a school board for 24 years. But I was a practicing lawyer, a litigator. I actually have more courtroom experience than almost anybody who works in the Attorney General's office. And this would be a big change, because for the last 16 years, we've had political lawyers as Attorneys General without any real courtroom experience. So this would be a change in the Attorney General's office. I was a Judge Pro Tem in the Superior Court, Judge Pro Tem in the Court of Appeals. I taught legal writing at ASU Law School. I wrote a legal textbook published by the State Bar that's in the 7th printing. So I have a lot of preparation to be superintendent of schools. I see Karen Butterfield has come back. I wanted to acknowledge her because she's our associate superintendent for academic achievement and has very much helped in realizing the results that we have that I've reported to. So Flagstaff can be very proud of Karen Butterfield.
Becky and I work with a great team. That's for sure.
Oh, and Becky too.
Yes,
no problem. Now, and I've used my legal experience as superintendent to do the second half of my job. The first half of my job was raising academic standards, as I had referred to. But the second half of my job, I believe the second half of the job of anybody in public office, is to do what you can to save the taxpayers' money. And I've used my legal skills to do that on what is also a 10th Amendment issue. And that is, when I took office, there was a federal judge who told us we had to spend more money on English language learners than we were spending. We spend about $6,000 per student on all of our students, English language learners and the others. And then the English language learners get another $350 per student that the other kids don't get. And the federal judge was saying, well, that's not enough. You need to spend even more. And some of you will remember he started fining Arizona $1 million a day and then $2 million a day. And we asked the Attorney General to appeal that. And the Attorney General refused to appeal that. Because the then Democrat governor was taking the side of the plaintiffs, the people who brought the lawsuit. And so had I not been there as a defendant, they would have had an easy time with it, because the people who were representing the state as defendants were in agreement that the federal judge should be able to order us to do this. So I was the only one who appealed that decision. And when the fines reached $20 million, I got the Ninth Circuit to put a freeze on them until they could hear the issue on the merits. And so in those days, I would introduce myself as the superintendent of schools and the shadow Republican attorney general, because the attorney general was not defending the taxpayers, and I was the only one who was defending the taxpayers, and I'd saved the taxpayers $20 million. But we went on, we argued the case on the merits, and again, the attorney general's office argued that the decision of the judge should be affirmed, which would mean we would have to pay a fine to the federal government. Now, we paid the attorney general's salary, so it's as though you hired a lawyer, paid him a fee, and he got up in court and said, my client should be fined. But happily, the Ninth Circuit agreed with me, reversed the fines, sent the case back to the trial court to hear evidence that they had refused to hear that I was offering that the kids were doing a lot better as English language learners. And my lawyer sat down with me and he said, Tom, you can no longer introduce yourself as the guy who saved the taxpayers $20 million, because if we had lost this case, the freeze on the fines would have been taken off. They would have grown through that entire period before the case was heard on the merits, and they would have been $300 million. So now you have to introduce yourself as the guy who saved the taxpayers $300 million. Well, we went back to the trial court. In the meantime, the legislature passed a bill to try to comply as best they could that set up a task force. And we worked with that task force and established that the kids had to get intensive instruction in English at least 4 hours a day. When I ran for office back in 2002, the kids were still being taught in Spanish in our schools under a bilingual program. And I promised to eliminate that, and I did eliminate that my first month in office. That was a promise made and a promise kept. But a lot of the schools threw the kids into the classes with the English-speaking kids, so the Spanish-speaking kids didn't understand what was going on. The English-speaking kids' education was interfered with because the teacher was distracted by kids who couldn't speak English in the class. And we said, no more of that. For the first year, you have to separate them, give them at least 4 hours a day of intensive instruction in English, so when they do go into the regular classroom, they're fluent in English, they can compete, and they can excel academically. And since we've done that, we've tripled our reclassification rate of English language learners to English proficient, and we're now one of the country's leaders in teaching kids English. Well, the legislature gave me the job of determining how much that would cost. And during this period, the local superintendents had a conference in Phoenix, and they held a press conference at the state capitol, and they said this program is going to cost the state an extra $300 million a year. Well, we studied it, and we said it's not going to cost $300 million a year, it's going to cost $40 million a year, which is what the legislature appropriated, so I saved the taxpayers another $260 million. The trial court ruled against us. The Ninth Circuit, this time we got a different panel, they ruled against us. I appealed the case to the United States Supreme Court, and I did it for a philosophical reason. And to tell you that philosophical reason, I need to do a little bit of a detour and talk to you what I've done to bring back the teaching of American history in our schools. Because I believe that people that have forgotten their history are like a man with amnesia. He doesn't know where he's been, he doesn't know where he's going, and he doesn't know who he is. And if we expect future generations to preserve our institutions, they need to know what there is to be proud of in those institutions, which means they need to know our history. And when I took office, believe it or not, under the standards that they existed at the time, teaching of history had fallen to such a low level that our high school kids were not learning about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers, the ideas on which our country was based. Under the standards as they existed at that time, the last time they learned those things was in the 7th grade when they were 13 years old. And in world history, the last time they learned about the Greco-Roman basis for Western civilization was in the 6th grade when they were 12 years old. And so I promised to reform that, and my first year in office we persuaded the State Board of Education to adopt new standards so that our high school kids are now learning about our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers, the ideas on which our country was based, the Greco-Roman basis for Western civilization. That also is a promise made and a promise kept. And then we tackled kindergarten through 12th grade, because I believe it's what you're exposed to when you're very young that has resonance for you later on. So if you expose kids at a very early age to history, they can learn in much greater depth in high school. And that was a 2-year fight, because we had teachers come into the state board say they didn't want to do it was too much work, and so on. But we finally won that fight and adopted content-rich history standards. And the chief historian for the History Channel held a press conference. And she said she had read the history standards of all 50 states, and Arizona was head and shoulders above the other states, something I'm very proud of. Now, one of the things that we teach our students is that we rebelled against England because we felt we were smart enough to rule ourselves through our elected representatives, and we didn't need a British aristocracy ruling over us. And I believe we're still smart enough to rule ourselves